Hi friends, welcome. My name is Lisa Graustein. I'm a member of Beacon Hill Friends Meeting in Boston, and this is part of a video series I'm doing as the virtual plenary for our sessions this summer, which theme is Provoke One Another to Love. This is a second set of 3 videos I'm doing, this one focusing on our minute challenging white supremacy. This video will look at the minute, the next one will look at patterns of behaviors that come out of the minute, and the third one will offer a spiritual practice in connection with this minute. So let's get started. As with the last video series I did on the Doctrine of Discovery, I actually want to start by inviting us to do some embodied listening and to take a moment and just get centered and grounded. So I invite you to sit fully wherever you are. You can place your feet flat on the floor. Take a deep breath and just take a moment to connect with your divine center, connect with that of God within you. That presence that is always there, but sometimes in the busyness of our day-to-day lives, we forget to connect with fully. And so as you continue to get centered and breathe deeply, I invite you to just notice your body, where you're connected to the ground or whatever you're sitting on, how your body's feeling, how you might want to shift or move it to get a little bit more comfortable. Straighten your spine to the extent that you can. Ease your shoulders, whatever you need to do to bring presence and mindfulness to these next few minutes we're going to share together. As we go through this video, whether you're watching it or just listening to it as a podcast, please notice your feelings and notice them without judgment, but just what comes up. That when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about colonization, when we talk about our role as a yearly meeting in white supremacy and ending white supremacy, it's going to bring up a bunch of feelings, and so that we just notice those feelings and that we feel them fully and learn what we can from them. Similar to our feelings, that we notice energy, we notice how energy is moving in our body, where it might feel stuck, where we're tensing up, where we're feeling open. And again, to do that noticing without judgment, but just bring awareness to how energy is moving in our body. And then finally, I invite us to connect with what we know. And I don't just mean like intellectually know, but what we know to be true, that when we hear the truth spoken, it resonates at a deeper level. And also what the divine gifts of wisdom God is giving us at this time in our movement forward, in our growth individually and as a yearly meeting. So breathe, be present, welcome. I want to start this video by talking about 3 terms that we've used a lot in our conversations and that often we use interchangeably. And those are white supremacy, structural racism, and white privilege. And before I get into defining them, I want to just invite you to notice what comes up for you when you hear those terms. When you hear white supremacy, what happens in your body, what happens in your heart, what happens in your mind? When you hear the term structural racism, similarly, what comes up for you? When you hear white privilege, what comes up? What do you notice? If you are listening or watching to this with other people, I invite you to pause for a moment and just share what comes up for you. Again, without judgment, but just what's moving in you. So I want to define these terms and offer definitions that I use. If you click on the link below, it'll take you to a page on the Yearly Meeting website where I've put a bunch of links to more information where you can read other people's definitions, get some of the background and history on all these terms and everything we're talking about. So I understand white supremacy to be an ideology, a mindset that places whiteness and white people and their needs as superior to and more important than people of color, and sanctions actions for the benefit of white people at the expense of people of color. So it's a worldview, it's a way of thinking that says white people are superior to and get whatever they want at the expense of people of color. That then creates, particularly in the United States, structural racism, which normalizes the tenets of white supremacy into our everyday institutions, cultures, and interactions. So it institutionalizes racism. So white supremacy is the mindset, and structural racism is the way that we make that concrete and real in our society. And so that's everything from our education system, banking and business systems, criminal justice and court systems, military systems, our literature, music, media, and all the ways that we've been taught to interact with each other. Once we've structured racism and made it concrete, put it into our institutions, Those of us who are white get to experience white privilege, which confers specific tangible benefits and advantages on white people, again, most often at the expense of people of color. So as a white person, I experience a tremendous range of white privilege every day of my life. When I walk into banks, a university, a business, my presence is never questioned. My right to be there is never questioned. My intellect and capacity as a white person is not questioned. When I go into stores, I can find healthcare and beauty products that are, I'm sorry, not healthcare, but beauty products that are designed for my hair texture, my skin type, Band-Aid to match my skin tone. I can look at any magazine rack in any bookstore and find magazines, books, images, TV images that reflect people who look like me in a huge range of roles and in every position of power. When I walk around with my child, nobody questions who we are, our relationship, where we're supposed to be, any of those things. So there's so many, many white privileges. And again, the links below will name many others. But I just wanted to define these three terms because they come up in how we understand the minute, then the work we need to do to interrupt white supremacy that we commit to in this minute. So I'm going to read the minute now, and we put several paragraphs of framing around the minute when we wrote it, and I'm just going to go through that in the order that we did it. We approved this minute in 2016. So here's the beginning. Our hearts were touched earlier this week when we heard the pain and honesty in the reports of the experiences of Friends of Color and other attenders at the 2016 Friends General Conference gathering, and in the report from several friends who attended the April 2016 White Privilege Conference in Philadelphia. So Friends General Conference is an organization of mostly liberal unprogrammed meetings and yearly meetings from throughout the United States and Canada, of which New England Yearly Meeting is a member. And the gathering is a week-long event that happens every year at the end of June, beginning of July, and involves somewhere between 1,200 and 2,000 friends from the US and Canada coming together. The White Privilege Conference is a non-Quaker multi-day conference that happens every year, usually in the spring. It moves around the country. It's hosted by the White Privilege Institute, which is committed to ending white supremacy, racism, and white privilege. We felt the spirit move us to affirmation and action. The clerk requested that we hold a threshing session to determine our initial step. LVM Shelton and David Haynes reported on the discernment of these friends and proposed a minute for our discernment. The body engaged in a deep, vulnerable, and extended exercise in response to the proposed minute. We truly labored over the work and traveled over the rocky ground we needed to traverse. Some were uncomfortable with the words white supremacy and colonized in the minute. These are strong words. One friend described them as brutal. Not everyone present agreed that these words are accurate as a description of our condition. We do not share a common understanding of these words. Friends made many suggestions of other words or phrases we might use together to express how we are affected by the pervasive structure of racism and power in our culture. White privilege, complicit in, and wounded by were suggested. Others felt that although these are hard words, they are honest. Supremacy refers to a system that empowers white people. Colonized is an accurate word for how we are inhabited by the culture without our consent. Fear or denial of a hard truth causes us to forget our deep connections with each other. We need to release our fear to hear each other clearly. And then the framing continues. We are each only able to speak from and know the world from our own experience. We heard how the experiences of friends of color and the experience of white friends differ even within our beloved Quaker communities and gatherings, even this week at sessions. Only a few among us know firsthand the experience of driving while Black, or the constant fear of wondering if our children are safe, even when simply leaving the campus of Castleton University to walk to town to get a milkshake. We long to find the right words, but we do not know the right words. Yet we are clear we want to do this work. When we know truth experientially, but do not know each other's experience, we only know a portion of the truth. This minute is an important instance of speaking truth to power. This minute represents the hard truth of Friends of Color. The largely white yearly meeting is the power that needs to receive this truth. We want to grow. We want to become whole. We have received this minute and have been exercised. We want to invite others into the same experience. With our hearts broken open, we approve the following minute, uniting with it with both joy and pain. This is the truth God has brought to us at this time. We feel the love in these words. And then here's the minute we approved. We are complicit in white supremacy. We at New England Yearly Meeting have been colonized by our white supremacist culture and fall short of our full potential as a gathered body of Quaker meetings because of this colonization. We commit to engaging in interrupting white supremacy in ourselves, within individuals, interpersonally, in our meetings, and at all systems levels of NEYM. To start this, we asked Permanent Board to explore an external cultural competency audit of New England Yearly Meeting. We support Friends General Conference, an organization of which we are part, in its efforts to interrupt white supremacy in its organization. We commit to support fundraising by the New England Yearly Meeting FGC Committee to raise $4,000 from our membership and our monthly meetings by the end of 2016. These funds will be available to Friends General Conference towards the cost of an external cultural competency audit if FGC decides to have one conducted. If more than $4,000 is raised, we direct the Permanent Board of New England Yearly Meeting to find use for the additional funds to support the work of interrupting white supremacy. The clerk asks us to go forward in love, in confidence, and boldness, knowing that God is with us. So that was our minute. Let's talk a little bit about the framing. So first is the language, that we don't have a shared understanding a lot of the words we are using, and we didn't always have shared agreement around those words, that we are stepping into talking about a huge part of our society and culture that we often, as a predominantly white yearly meeting, have not talked about. And so we don't even always have the words to have clear communication with each other, and that we have strong visceral responses to the connotations of the different words we're using. And so one of the things we need to do is to continue to talk, to practice talking, to talk with our children, and to be explicit about what we mean, what words we're using, and what we're saying, so we can build that shared language and understanding. And in building that understanding, we acknowledge we can only ever speak from our own experience, but that because we're a diverse yearly meeting, we have different experiences, and different ones of us have very different experiences. And that connected to those different experiences are the power dynamics of race. That because in our yearly meeting, a large number of friends are white and a much smaller number of friends are people of color, that there are some power dynamics around whose experiences get centered, whose experiences get validated, whose experiences are shared broadly, and whose experiences are shared in smaller spaces. And that as we build this shared language, as we do this work of starting to interrupt white supremacy, we have to be really conscious of our own experiences, of how we're receiving other people's experiences, and what the power dynamics around not just those experiences are, but how they get held, heard, shared, and validated. And so our first step is committing to a process. And we say we're going to do two things. One, we're going to commit to interrupting white supremacy at many levels. So internally, interpersonally, and then institutionally within our organization. And secondly, one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to raise funds to support Friends General Conference in doing the audit. And since 2016, we raised those funds. The audits happened. Again, if you click on the links below, you can find the report from that audit. We also asked Permanent Board of our yearly meeting to consider doing a similar audit. And to my knowledge, we haven't done an audit yet or something similar. And then the final piece that goes back to language and our shared understanding experiences is we're a little confused about our role in white supremacy. That sometimes we say we're complicit in it, and sometimes we say we've been colonized by it. And I want to unpack that a little bit and get to some more of the truth around and history around our role as a yearly meeting in relationship to white supremacy. So in our minute, we say, we at New England Yearly Meeting have been colonized by our white supremacist culture and fall short of our full potential as a gathered body of Quaker meetings because of this colonization. So let's first define what we mean by colonization. So to colonize, Group A takes political control, often through military force, of Group B in order to exploit the land, resources, and labor of Group B for the benefit of Group A. So to colonize is the act of taking power in order to gain resources. So the colonizer benefits materially, socially, and politically from the act of colonization. When a colonizer colonizes, they get material and economic resources, social power, and political power. The colonized are, by the act of colonization, denied full choice, agency, and consent over their lives, land, and futures, often resulting in the loss of culture, institutional power, language, identity, and freedom. And so if we look at the history of our nation, and if we look at the history of much of the world, we can see how colonization has done this over time, and we can see how it's currently happening right now. So I want to talk about the intersections of Quakers, colonization, and white supremacy. The first Quakers to come to New England, or what's now New England, were Mary Fisher and Anne Austen, and they arrived in July of 1656 in Boston Colony. They were promptly kicked out because the Puritan colonial powers were not interested in Quakers and definitely not interested in Quaker women who wanted to preach. The following year, in 1657, the Woodhouse, a ship sailed from England with a large number of friends, arrived in Rhode Island. Rhode Island colony was much more welcoming to Quakers, and so Quakerism really grew in Rhode Island while Friends were still trying to get into Boston. By 1661, New England Yearly Meeting had been formed. So we were founded as an institution in the colonies in 1661. And remember, the colonies are very small at this time. And by 1743, over 5,000 Friends gathered for Yearly Meeting. Now remember, in 1743, almost everyone in the colonies and in New England is either a subsistence farmer or working in the maritime trades. And so to give up a week or two to travel by horse or by foot to Yearly Meeting and then travel home meant leaving crops, meant leaving livestock, and meant leaving the most productive time for fishing in the area. And so we know there's many more Quakers than the 5,000 who showed up to Yearly Meeting. And so by this point in the colonies in New England, Quakers are a significant part of the population and a significant part of each of the New England colonies, right? And also by this time, Philadelphia has taken off with a huge Quaker influence. So Quakers are very present. Now, what do Quakers get from this colonization? So the Quakers who are of European descent can very easily access lands for farms and meeting houses. This is indigenous land that European powers have taken over, and Quakers, whether they're coming from Europe or are born here to European parents, have immediate access to what's often free stolen land. That Quakers as a whole body benefit from the political protection of the colonial powers. So the laws banning Quaker worship in Boston Colony are dropped in the 1680s. And even though Quakers aren't fully embraced in Boston Colony socially right then, Quakers as a body and the Yearly Meeting as a whole gets to benefit from the colonial political power. So that when different indigenous nations rebel against colonization and attack the colonies, when other European powers attack the British colonies, Quakers are granted protection as part of the colonial society and power structure. And particularly in Rhode Island, Quakers are very active in the colonial political system and power structure. So whiteness doesn't exist at this time, and white supremacy as a concept isn't being talked about in that way, but it's being created and enacted every single day and very powerfully. And so European Friends, again, whether they've come directly from Europe or are descended from European Friends, get to slide right into whiteness. Race is not codified in the colonial power system until 1676, after Bacon's Rebellion, when the colonial powers recognized that a multiracial lower class uprising could actually overthrow them. And so they codify race into the political and colonial laws in order to create separations among the lower classes. And so whiteness gets written down, it gets codified, it gets created. And European Friends and Friends of European descent get to slide right into that whiteness and all of the political, social, and economic privileges that get conferred upon it. There are Friends of color at this time in New England, and they are having different experiences both within Quaker society of how welcome they are, and definitely within the colonial society, they don't have the full rights and access and privileges that Friends of European descent do. And so there's a notable case when Paul and John Cuffey, who are brothers from Massachusetts, their father is Asante, their mother's Wampanoag, and they have to pay taxes, but they don't have the right to vote because they're not white. And so they actually sue the Massachusetts legislature saying, if you're going to charge us taxes, we get the right to vote. And so Friends of color are constantly having to fight for the political rights and freedoms that white Friends and European Friends are granted through the creation of whiteness. And we have to remember too that a significant number of Friends in New England during this time were slavers, own, control, dominate, sell other people, are slave traders, that some of our early Quaker institutions are actually endowed by funds generated by Quakers who are slave traders and whose wealth has come from the kidnapping, abusing, and selling of Africans. And that most friends are engaged in the slave economy just because the slave economy is so integral to the overall colonial economy. So when we talk about being colonized by white supremacy, that's actually inaccurate. That as a body, as an institution, New England Yearly Meeting was and is an active part of the continued colonization of this part of North America, that we as an institution benefited from that colonization and continue to benefit from that colonization, and that Friends of European Descent were a part of claiming whiteness, of creating whiteness, and of benefiting from whiteness and white supremacy. So we haven't been, as an institution, colonized by white supremacy. We have been active participants in the colonization of this land and in the formation and creation of white supremacy. Both of those things are completely counter to how God wants us to live and to be. And so our commitment to interrupting white supremacy is to understanding this history, claiming this history, and then working to repair the tremendous damage that has been done to all people by this history. And so as we grow and live into this minute, we're going to need to add some other languages and words and pieces of truth into how we're talking about and understanding our role in this bigger system. So I want to go back to white supremacy, structural racism, and white privilege. Early friends and friends throughout time have been a part of creating and perpetuating white supremacy, and there have always been those friends that have been challenging white supremacy, have been standing in resistance to white supremacy. And we as a yearly meeting are making a commitment to say collectively we're going to shift into a place of resistance against white supremacy, which also means changing how we have structured racism into our yearly meeting, as well as changing how we engage with structural racism in the rest of the world. And that also means for those of us who are white, working to dismantle white privilege and working to understand how white privilege impacts us and how we can use our privileges in ways that promote justice and equity. And so I want to talk just very briefly about what some of that justice and healing work looks like. The next video I'm going to do on this minute will look at the specific patterns of behavior and get into some of the more nuanced and granular ways we can challenge this. So I just want to do a big overview right here. So if white supremacy is this lie that white people are superior to people of color, one of the first things we need to do is to expose those lies and tell the truth. Tell the truth of the history, tell the truth of the current reality, and expose the lies that are white supremacy. If structural racism is about institutionalizing racism, we need to dismantle those structures and work to make reparations. That structural racism, because it institutionalized racism, has conferred generational benefits to those of us who are white at the cost and detriment of those friends and people of color. And so if we're going to address that, we have to dismantle those structures and then work to make reparations to balance out the resources and political power that were either taken or denied from different groups of people. And then where white privilege confers specific benefits, we need to work to equalize the benefits and opportunities for all people. White privilege also centers in norms, whiteness, and white culture, phenotypes, ways of being. And so we need to diversify what normal is. Actually, we need to eradicate normal and get to a diversity and fluency of ways of being with each other in different ways. So as always, I want to end these videos with some reflection questions. If you're on your own to consider, if you're with other people to share and talk about. So first, as you listen to this, what did you notice in your body? How are you feeling right now, physically, emotionally, energetically? What's coming up for you? What does this minute require of you? What does this minute require of your Quaker church or meeting? What does this minute require of our yearly meeting? And how are you interrupting white supremacy? And then the third question is, what truth do you know? What information and understanding do you need to grow the truth? All of us have things to learn. Some of us have a lot more things to learn because we have been blinded by white supremacy and white privilege. And so now is the chance to take the logs out of our own eyes and to really learn that history, learn that truth, look at the current reality, and fully understand and inhabit our individual roles in this so that collectively we can work together to interrupt and dismantle white supremacy and structural racism and white privilege. And so what's the truth that you need? What's the information that you need to do that work? Thank you, friends.